The barn smelled like dust and old hay. Bill Doolin stood in the doorway, watching the road. His hand rested on the frame, fingers tapping once, then still. Behind him, 3 horses waited in the dark. No one had said much for the last hour. Something had changed. They all felt it. Bill Doolin wasn't born an outlaw. He came to Oklahoma Territory in 1881, 23 years old, looking for ranch work like 1,000 other men. He rode fence lines, branded cattle, slept under tarps when the bunkhouse was full. The work was hard, the pay was low, and most nights he was too tired to think about much else. For years that was enough, but the territory was changing. Railroads pushed through. Towns appeared where there had only been grass. More people meant more law, and more law meant less room for men like him, men who worked with their hands and didn't ask permission. By 1891, Doolin was riding with the Dalton brothers. They weren't famous yet, just a group of men who'd decided the straight life didn't pay what it promised. They hit small-town banks, took what they could carry, and disappeared into the plains before posses could form. Doolin was quiet, methodical. He didn't drink much, didn't brag. While others spent their take in saloons, he saved his. He had a woman waiting for him in Ingalls, a preacher's daughter named Edith Ellsworth. She didn't know what he did for money, or maybe she knew and didn't ask. That was the thing about the territory. Everyone had a past. No one looked too close. In October of 1892, the Dalton gang tried to rob 2 banks at once in Coffeyville, Kansas. It was ambitious, too ambitious. Townspeople recognized them, grabbed rifles, and opened fire in the street. 4 gang members died that day. Bob and Grat Dalton were among them. Bill Doolin wasn't there. Some say his horse went lame on the way. Others say he had a feeling and turned back. Either way, he survived. After Coffeyville, the name Dalton became poison. Newspapers ran illustrations of the bodies laid out in the street. Lawmen started watching every known associate. Doolin could have walked away then, found work under a new name, married Edith quietly, and disappeared into normal life. But he didn't. Instead, he gathered the men who were left, George Newcomb, Charlie Pierce, Bill Dalton, and a few others, and formed what people would later call the Doolin-Dalton Gang, or sometimes just the Wild Bunch. They were careful at first, hit smaller towns, stayed out of Kansas, kept moving. For a while it worked. They made money. No one got killed. Doolin even managed to marry Edith in secret, though she lived in Ingalls and he couldn't stay more than a night or 2 at a time. But the law was tightening. U.S. Marshals began working in groups, covering more ground, sharing information. Towns started hiring guards. Banks installed heavier safes. The easy days were ending, and everyone knew it. In September of 1893, a posse tracked the gang to Ingalls. They surrounded the town at dawn. Doolin and his men were inside, eating breakfast, unaware. When the shooting started, it lasted for hours. The gang fought their way out, but 3 lawmen died in the street. After that, their faces were everywhere. Wanted posters went up across 3 states. There was no going back now. The months that followed were a slow grind. The gang kept moving, kept robbing, but the distances between safe places grew longer. Men started getting picked off. George Newcomb was killed in May of 1895. Charlie Pierce went down with him. Bill Dalton was shot that same summer trying to hide out in Texas. Doolin kept going. He had a son now, a boy he'd only seen twice. Edith was living with her family, trying to keep her name out of the papers. Doolin sent her money when he could,
but it wasn't enough to make up for what she'd lost. By the summer of 1896, he was alone more often than not. The gang had fractured. Some were dead, some were in prison, the rest had scattered. Doolin moved between old hideouts, sleeping in barns and abandoned cabins, always listening for horses. He was tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a long day, the kind that sits in your chest and doesn't leave. In July, he made a decision. He'd go to Eureka Springs, Arkansas. There was a clinic there, a bathhouse where people went for healing. He'd been having trouble with his lungs, coughing up blood some mornings. He thought maybe he could rest, get clean, figure out what came next. He told no one where he was going.
On August 24, 1996, Deputy Marshal Heck Thomas received a tip. A man matching Doolin's description had been seen near Lawson, Oklahoma, not far from Edith's family home. Thomas and 2 other marshals rode out that evening. They found Doolin walking along a country road just after dark. He was alone, on foot, carrying a Winchester. When Thomas called out, Doolin turned and raised the rifle. The marshals fired first. Doolin went down in the road and didn't get back up. He was 38 years old. They brought his body back to Guthrie and laid it out for photographs. Edith came to see him. She didn't cry in front of the crowds. She just stood there for a long time, looking at his face. A few days later, they buried him in a quiet cemetery outside of town. There was no trial, no final words, just a man who'd chosen a path and followed it until it ended. The Wild Bunch didn't last much longer. By the turn of the century, most of them were dead or locked away. The territory became a state. The railroads kept coming. Towns grew into cities. And the men who'd tried to live outside the law became stories people told, half true, half myth. But Bill Doolin was real. He lived, he made choices, and he paid for them. That's all there is. If you'd like to hear more stories like this one, consider subscribing. There are more to tell.